Welcome back. Now back to one of our top stories. The closure of the Lebombo border post has caused the loss of about 5 billion rand in cargo delays. That's according to the Road Freight Association, who says the Mozambique post-elections violence has left hundreds of trucks, mostly carrying chrome, stranded. Now, with the border fully reopened, let's get an update now on how they're coping, also the tallying of the cost. And for that, I'm joined by the Road Freight Association CEO, Gavin on the extent of losses. Gavin, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. 5 billion, quite a substantial loss there for the industry. And then with the concerns around what's coming in the new week from tomorrow onwards, fears that you may have about further costs?
Good evening, Naledi, and good evening to your listeners. I think I need to correct that figure first. That seems to have been a misquote somewhere along the line. Not 5 billion. We were saying 5 million a day. And we were saying, if you recall, going back into the huge transport issues that happened around the port of Durban, if this continued, we could start seeing R1 billion loss a day. So no, it definitely hasn't cost us 5 billion. Our rough figures now that we've got from various sources and from those operating in the industry is it was costing roughly 10 million a day. So we're at 50 million. So perhaps somebody took the million and made it a billion. That's where we are. About 6 million a day is direct into road freight logistics. So that means damages to vehicles. It means injury to drivers, means loss of loads, inability to keep your vehicles moving. Now, remember, one of the big things is trucks are on a circular route. Normally, they'll go in, drop off cargo, pick off cargo, and come back, obviously apart from the coal and the manganese and the iron ore type of operations. So there's a lot of disruption to the logistics chain, and that means businesses then start feeling the pinch. And then the rest of that 10 million, about 4 million, is what happens into the other sectors, the servicing, the manufacturing, tourism, retail and mining, etc. So probably about 10 million a day. We probably at about 50 million. It might rise a bit more. In the report just earlier on, I heard somebody saying they were getting messages that there could be something happening tomorrow. That's a concern because just as we now start to operate normally, and we've pushed about 1,200 trucks through the border post in the last 48 hours. That's about 25 kilometers of trucks. That's a lot of trucks. Those trucks are in Mozambique. So that's a huge concern for us that they are suddenly seen as soft targets.
Yeah. Then there's so much to talk about, right? Because with the border post open, you talk about those that are making their way into Mozambique. One reporter who was inside Mozambique also telling Channel 405 that Mondlane, who's I suppose the candidate who was running for the opposition in the selection in Mozambique, one of the things that he said is he's asked for 3 to 4 waves of protests. The third has taken place and possibly a fourth set to kick off tomorrow. So what is the sort of preparation that needs to be put in place where another wave of protests and possible unrest in Mozambique could possibly take place? So what is the communication that's necessary, and is what you're getting sufficient?
Well, Naledi, the first thing that we did in the first two, if you want to call them waves, but the first 2 incidences that we had when there was the stop-start of the border, you'll recall that started, and then there were the 4 days of closure. Between the stop-start and the 4 days of closure, on the South African side, we got all the authorities together, we got all the role players who were part of that, SARS, SAPS, you name it, were all there to assist with those trucks who were at kilometer 4 to pull them through as quickly as we could, specifically those trucks that had fuel and those sorts of things that could become nasty incidents if they were torched. We tried to get communication going with the local Mozambican authorities. Obviously, they were being targeted during the protest. We eventually got communication going with them. By the time we'd got to the actual closures, the Mozambican police and army were actually communicating very well with us, communicating with their South African counterparts. We've had the president of South Africa chatting to the president of Mozambique. We've had regional authorities speaking. So right now, we actually have far better communication than we had about 18 days ago. What we do have in place now are systems, or not systems, I suppose, processes to pull vehicles through very quickly. We now know that the police and the army on the Mozambican side will create a safe zone at kilometer 4 and from kilometer 4 towards the Lebombo border, and hopefully retain any sort of protest, any sort of violence that happened in that area, caught everyone off guard at the very beginning. So that's really what's in place. It's what happens between there and the port of Maputo, or generally in the country, and that you can imagine. Nobody can stamp everything out everywhere. That actually, in some places, it will be a reaction when things start.
Yeah, and of course, I don't take it for granted that there have been reports of even network connectivity issues within Mozambique as a result of this unrest. But I'm going to take the shot in the dark anyway and say, well, for truck drivers that are inside Mozambique as the week starts, if the protests do flare up again, what is the immediate, action that they should be taking, or call that they need to be making?
Well, it depends where they are, Naledi. So if they are close to the harbour, hopefully, and if the harbour is operating, remember operations were suspended there, they could be retained within the harbour precinct. Of course, there's only a certain amount of vehicles the harbour can have. We hope that the Mozambican police and army will escort them to safe zones, and that, as I said, we are hoping that kilometer 4 and west of that towards us would be a safe zone. So it's going to be very much, if something starts, getting the trucks to move to these various points where there is a pronounced presence of the police and army.
We talk about the trucks, so we, might very well talk about the extent, and the length that we're seeing, or the stretch of road that we see covering up these trucks when they are backed up on their way towards a border, for instance, like Lebombo. What we don't talk about is the lived experience of some of these truck drivers, right? Many of them, we believe, in the past week, are stuck at that border for days on end. Then there's questions around, food, water, sanitation, the very, very basics. And in previous sort of situations where we've seen trucks are stuck like that, you've had to get organizations, for instance, like Gift of the Givers, to step in with some aid. Is that a concern for you?
Yes, that's always a concern. You'll recall the terrible scenes we had during COVID, and we learned a couple of lessons from that. And when this happened at Lebombo, there were local businesses, local authorities who came forward. They acted actually very quickly. A number of the role players got together. I used the term task team, and everyone wanted to know who was in charge of the task team. It was actually everyone getting together and helping, making sure there was water. More importantly, making sure there was security. So the trucks. So if you have 1,000 trucks at 22 meters long, that's already 25 kilometers, because obviously there's a bit of space in between. So making sure there was patrolling. Local security companies played a tremendous role in securing, making sure that the trucks were safe when the drivers could go and take a break, making lift clubs to get them to toilets so they could wash. But it's something we've got to think about going forward, is having those sorts of things as not mobile clinics, but we have mobile clinics, but we have mobile toilets or ablutions. So we have this sort of thing, we can station them along the side of the road. So that's something we've got to think about going forward.